The winter that year felt endless. Snow covered the roads, the rooftops, and even the tall pine trees beyond the valley. The cold wind howled through the narrow streets of Black Hollow day and night, making people stay inside their homes whenever they could. Food had become scarce, and most families worried more about survival than kindness. A hunter named Elias walked slowly through the forest with tired eyes and frozen hands. His thick coat was covered in snow, and the leather bag hanging from his shoulder was nearly empty. He had spent 3 days checking traps in the mountains, but bad weather had scared most animals away. The little food he carried would barely last him through the week. Elias lived alone on the edge of town in a small wooden cabin. Years earlier, sickness had taken his wife and young son during the same brutal season. Since then, he had become a quiet man who kept to himself. He hunted, traded furs, and spoke little to others unless necessary. Some villagers thought he was cold-hearted, but the truth was simpler. Pain had made him silent. As the sun began to disappear behind the hills, Elias decided to take a shorter path home through the old wagon trail near the frozen creek. The area was dangerous during storms, but he wanted to reach his cabin before dark. The wind suddenly carried a strange sound. At first, he thought it was an injured animal. Then he heard it again. A weak cry. Elias stopped walking. He listened carefully while the snow blew around him. The sound came from somewhere near the broken trees ahead. Slowly, he stepped forward. Near the side of the frozen creek, half covered in snow, lay an overturned wagon. One wheel had snapped clean off, and pieces of cloth were hanging from the sides. The wagon looked old, abandoned for days. Another cry came from underneath it. Elias tightened his grip on the hunting knife at his belt. Travelers sometimes used traps to lure people closer, but the cry sounded too weak, too frightened. He crouched beside the wagon and pushed away snow with his gloves. What he saw made him freeze. 2 young orc girls were hiding beneath the wreckage. They could not have been older than 10 or 11. Their skin had a pale green shade, almost gray from cold. One of them held a broken wooden stick as if trying to defend herself. The smaller girl trembled violently while hiding behind the older one. Their clothes were torn and dirty. Snow covered their hair and shoulders. Both looked starved. The older girl stared at Elias with fear and anger mixed together. She looked ready to fight even though she barely had strength to sit upright. Elias had seen orcs before. Years ago, border wars between humans and orc clans had destroyed entire villages. Stories about raids and killings still filled taverns at night. Most people in Black Hollow hated orcs deeply. Helping them was dangerous. But these were children. The smaller girl suddenly coughed hard and nearly collapsed. Elias noticed how the older sister quickly wrapped both arms around her, trying to protect her from the cold. Even in fear, she cared more about the younger child than herself. Something about that moment hit him harder than he expected. He remembered his own son during the winter sickness years ago. Small, weak, cold. The older girl spoke first in broken human language. "Please, no hurt." Elias looked around the empty forest. No guards, no soldiers, no travelers, just snow and silence. He let out a long breath. "You'll die here by morning," he muttered quietly. The older girl still did not trust him. Elias slowly removed the small loaf of bread from his bag and placed it near them before stepping back. The younger girl stared at it with wide eyes. The older sister hesitated only a second before grabbing the bread and tearing off pieces for the smaller child first. They ate like they had not seen food in days. Elias watched silently. "Can you walk?" he finally asked. The older girl nodded weakly. Night was coming fast, and the storm was getting worse. Leaving them there meant certain death. Elias cursed under his breath. "Come on," he said. "Just for tonight." The girls looked confused. "My cabin isn't far." For a moment, neither moved. Then the smaller one slowly reached for the older sister's hand. Together, they crawled out from beneath the wagon. Up close, Elias realized how thin they were. Their faces looked hollow from hunger. The younger girl limped badly, and the older one tried hiding it every time she stumbled. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than usual. The storm grew heavier, and snow reached almost to their knees in some places. More than once, Elias had to stop and help the smaller girl through deep snowdrifts. She barely weighed anything. When they finally reached the cabin, warm light glowed through the windows. The younger girl stared at it quietly, almost like she had forgotten what warmth looked like. Inside, Elias quickly locked the door against the wind. He placed more wood into the fire while the girls stood nervously near the entrance. The cabin was simple. One table, 2 chairs, hunting tools hanging from the walls, shelves filled with jars and supplies. The younger girl kept staring at the fire. "You can sit," Elias said. They moved carefully, still ready to run at any moment. Elias heated leftover stew over the fire. The smell filled the room quickly. Meat, potatoes, onions. The girls watched the pot like starving wolves. When the food was ready, Elias placed bowls in front of them. "Eat slowly," he warned. They ignored that advice immediately. The younger girl nearly burned herself trying to swallow too fast. The older sister kept glancing at Elias between bites, still unsure if this kindness was real. Elias pretended not to notice. After several minutes, the younger girl finally slowed down. A tiny smile appeared on her face for the first time. It was small, but it changed the entire room. Elias looked away toward the fire. "What are your names?" he asked. The older girl hesitated. "Vara," she answered carefully, pointing at herself. Then she touched the smaller child's shoulder. "Lenny." Elias nodded once. The younger girl looked exhausted. Her eyes kept closing while holding the warm bowl in both hands. "You can sleep near the fire tonight," Elias said. Vara immediately became tense again. "We leave morning," she said quickly. "That's fine." He brought extra blankets from a wooden chest, old but thick enough to keep them warm. Lenny wrapped herself tightly in one and sat near the fireplace. Within minutes, she had fallen asleep against her sister's shoulder. Vara stayed awake. She watched Elias carefully while he cleaned dishes at the table. Finally, she spoke softly. "Why help?" Elias paused for a moment. He did not have a good answer. Maybe because he knew what it felt like to lose family. Maybe because no child deserved to freeze to death in the snow. Or maybe because the world already had enough cruelty. "You were hungry," he simply replied. Vara stared at him silently. Outside, the storm grew louder. Hours passed. Elias sat in his chair near the window while holding an old hunting rifle across his lap. He was used to sleeping lightly during winter nights. Sometime after midnight, distant sounds broke through the wind. Horses. Elias immediately stood. More than one rider. Vara noticed his expression and quickly woke Lenny. The sound of voices followed. "Men." Elias moved toward the window carefully and peeked outside. 3 mounted soldiers carrying lanterns rode slowly along the road near the cabin. Their heavy coats carried the Northern Guard symbol. Vara's face turned pale. "They search," she whispered urgently. The riders stopped near the property fence. One of them shouted through the storm, "Anyone inside?" Elias cursed quietly under his breath. Lenny looked terrified. Another soldier called out, "We're searching for 2 orc thieves seen near the old trail." Vara grabbed Lenny's hand tightly. Elias thought fast. His eyes moved toward the wooden floor beside the fireplace. Years ago, he had built a hidden storage space beneath the cabin to keep supplies safe during raids. He looked at the girls. "Quiet," he whispered. He quickly pulled aside a rug and lifted the hidden wooden hatch. The space below was cramped but enough for 2 small children. "Hurry." Vara hesitated. The soldiers were already approaching the front door. Elias lowered his voice. "If they see you, they'll kill you." That was enough. Vara climbed down first with Lenny beside her. Before closing the hatch, Elias handed them an extra blanket. "No sound," he warned. The hatch shut just as heavy knocks hit the door. Elias opened it slowly. 3 soldiers stood outside holding lanterns and spears. Snow covered their boots and shoulders. The tallest one stepped forward. "Sorry for the hour," he said. "We're tracking 2 young orcs. Witnesses say they escaped through this area." Elias kept his face calm. Only thing out there tonight is snow. The soldier looked past him into the cabin. You alone? Yes. Another guard entered without waiting for permission. He checked corners, shelves, and windows while the others watched Elias closely. The room felt painfully silent. Under the floorboards, Elias knew the girls could hear every word. The second guard returned after a minute. Nothing here. The tall soldier looked disappointed. If you see them, report it immediately. They're dangerous. Elias nodded once. The soldiers mounted their horses again and disappeared into the storm. Elias closed the door but did not move for several seconds. Only when the sound of horses vanished completely did he finally lift the hatch again. Vara climbed out slowly with Lenny still shaking beside her. For the first time since entering the cabin, Vara looked truly afraid. They won't stop, she whispered. Elias studied her face carefully. What do you mean? Vara looked toward the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. If war clans find us. She swallowed hard. Blood follows. The next morning, the storm finally began to calm, but Black Hollow still looked trapped beneath endless snow. Smoke rose from chimneys across the village while people cleared paths outside their homes. Life slowly returned to normal for everyone else. Inside the cabin, nothing felt normal anymore. Elias barely slept after the soldiers left. He sat near the fire most of the night while Vara and Lenny rested under the blankets. Every small sound outside made him look toward the door. At sunrise, Lenny woke first. For a few seconds, she looked confused, staring at the warm fire and wooden walls around her. Then she remembered where she was and quietly smiled. Elias noticed she was still holding the empty wooden bowl from dinner like it was something precious. You hungry again already? He asked. Lenny looked embarrassed and nodded slowly. That tiny moment almost made Elias laugh for the first time in months. He cooked oats and dried meat over the fire while Vara watched carefully from the corner of the room. She still did not fully trust him. You said one night, she reminded him. I remember. Vara lowered her eyes. We leave after food. Elias handed her a bowl. In this weather, you won't make it 2 miles. She did not answer because deep down she knew he was right. The younger girl ate quietly while warming her hands near the fire. Every now and then, she glanced around the cabin with curiosity. Her eyes stopped on an old wooden carving sitting near the shelf. A small toy horse. Lenny carefully picked it up. My son made that, Elias said before thinking. The room became quiet again. Lenny gently placed the toy back exactly where she found it. Elias looked away toward the fire. For the first time in years, someone else sat inside this cabin during breakfast. The silence no longer felt empty. 3 more days passed before the roads became safe enough to travel again. But by then, things had changed. The girls started helping around the cabin without being asked. Vara carried water buckets despite the cold. Lenny swept the floor and tried learning how to prepare food, even though she made more mess than progress. Elias noticed something strange. The cabin did not feel as lonely anymore. On the 4th morning, he walked into the kitchen and found Lenny asleep at the table with half-cut potatoes beside her. Vara had placed a blanket around her shoulders during the night. Elias stared quietly for a long moment. Then he sighed. Looks like you're both staying a little longer. Vara looked shocked. You mean, stay here? Until winter ends, Elias replied roughly. After that, we'll figure something out. Lenny nearly knocked over the chair trying to hug him. Elias awkwardly froze while the child wrapped tiny arms around his coat. Vara watched silently from across the room. That was the first time Elias saw tears in her eyes. Weeks slowly turned into months. The winter remained brutal, but life inside the cabin became warmer. Elias taught the girls simple things first. How to stack firewood properly. How to clean rabbit fur after hunting. How to tell if lake ice was safe to walk across. Vara learned quickly, almost too quickly. She copied everything Elias did with sharp focus. Hunting knots, traps, tracking footprints in snow. She missed nothing. Lenny, however, struggled to stay serious for longer than 5 minutes. She asked endless questions. Why humans drink bitter tea? Why snow squeaks when stepped on? Why your beard grows uneven? That last question made Elias choke on his drink while Vara tried not to laugh. Little by little, the cabin changed. Lenny hung small handmade decorations near the fireplace. Vara repaired broken chairs and fixed holes in the roof. For the first time in years, smoke rose daily from Elias's chimney because the home was truly being lived in again. Still, danger never fully disappeared. The people of Black Hollow hated orcs. So Elias created a story. He told villagers the girls were distant relatives from the northern hills whose parents had died during winter sickness. Most people accepted it because few had ever seen young orcs up close before. Still, whispers spread, especially after spring arrived. One afternoon, Elias took the girls into town to trade furs and buy supplies. Lenny stayed close beside him the entire time, nervous around crowds. Vara kept her hood low. As they walked through the market, several villagers stared openly at them. An old woman narrowed her eyes. Strange-looking children. Elias answered calmly. Mountain folk. The woman still looked suspicious. Then trouble came from somewhere unexpected. A large barrel slipped from a cart near the hill road and rolled directly toward a small human boy standing below. People shouted. The child froze in fear. Before Elias could react, Vara moved. She sprinted forward faster than any normal person could. The heavy barrel crashed toward her, but she caught it with both hands and stopped it before it reached the child. The market fell silent. Several villagers stared in shock. Even Elias realized too late what had happened. No ordinary girl could stop that kind of weight alone. Vara slowly lowered the barrel while keeping her hood over her face. The child's mother rushed forward and pulled her son away quickly. People began whispering again. That's strength. She's not human. I told you something felt wrong. Elias immediately ended trading and brought the girls home before more questions started. That night, the cabin felt tense. You must be careful, Elias warned quietly. Vara looked frustrated. The boy would die. I know. Then why angry? Elias rubbed his tired face. Because people fear what they don't understand. Vara stared into the fire silently. Lenny finally spoke softly. Humans always fear us? The question hit harder than Elias expected. He thought carefully before answering. Not all humans. Lenny looked at him for a long moment before smiling faintly. That smile carried more trust than words ever could. Months passed. Spring melted into summer, and the forests became green again. Elias continued teaching the girls how to survive quietly in the world around them. But the rumors in town kept growing. Some villagers believed the girls were cursed. Others thought they were hiding something dangerous. Children avoided them in the streets. One evening, Elias returned home from trapping and immediately sensed something wrong. The cabin door was slightly open. He reached for his hunting knife and stepped inside carefully. Vara stood near the table with blood on her lip. Lenny hid behind her, terrified. 3 drunken miners stood inside the cabin. Elias recognized them immediately from town. One pointed angrily at the girls. We knew it, the man slurred. Green-skinned monsters. Another kicked over a chair. Whole town talking about them. Elias stepped forward calmly. Leave. The tallest miner laughed. You hiding orcs in human land? Lenny clung tightly to Vara's arm. Elias saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. The kind children carry long after bad memories. Last warning, Elias said quietly. The miner grabbed Vara's shoulder roughly. Everything happened fast after that. Vara shoved the man backward with enough force to send him crashing into the wall. Another miner swung a fist toward her, but Elias blocked him first. The small cabin exploded into chaos. Furniture crashed. One miner slipped across the floor after Elias hit him with a bucket. Another tried reaching for a wood axe near the fireplace. Then suddenly everything stopped, because Vara growled. Not loudly, but deeply enough to freeze everyone in place. The sound barely sounded human. The miners backed away slowly. For the first time, fear replaced their anger. Elias stepped between them and the girls. Get out. None argued anymore. The men stumbled toward the door and disappeared into the night. Silence filled the cabin again. Lenny sat shaking near the fireplace while Vara wiped blood from her mouth angrily. Elias closed the broken door and sighed heavily. "They'll talk now," he muttered. Vara looked guilty. "We should leave." "No." She looked surprised. Elias picked up the fallen chair and set it upright again. "This is your home too now." The words stunned both girls. Lenny looked close to crying again. Later that night, after repairs were finished and the fire burned low, Vara finally spoke. "There's something you should know." Elias looked up from sharpening his knife. Vara stared into the flames while speaking slowly. "Our father, he was warrior." Elias stayed silent. "Not normal warrior," Vara continued. "He belonged to war party." Even Lenny looked nervous hearing those words. Elias had heard stories about orc war parties before. Ruthless groups that traveled between northern lands during the old wars. Some protected villages. Others destroyed them. "What happened to him?" Elias asked. Vara's face darkened. "Betrayed." The room became still. "Our clan chief feared him," she whispered. "Father wanted peace with humans. Others called him weak." Lenny lowered her head sadly. "One night war party attacked our family camp." Elias listened carefully. "Mother died helping us escape," Vara continued. "Father stayed behind to fight." Her voice shook slightly for the first time. "We never saw him again." Lenny quietly wiped tears from her face. Vara looked directly at Elias now. "Some clans think our bloodline dangerous." "Why?" "Because father was respected," she answered. "Many warriors followed him. If we live, old enemies fear someone may one day follow us too." Elias leaned back slowly. Suddenly everything made more sense. The soldiers, the fear, the running. These girls were not random orphans lost in snow. Someone had hunted them before, and maybe still was. Outside, thunder rumbled far beyond the mountains. Elias looked toward the dark forest through the window. For the first time in many years, he realized peace would not last forever. But when he looked back at the girls sitting near the fire, he knew one thing clearly. No matter what came for them next, he would not abandon them. The years passed quietly after that night. Seasons came and went over Black Hollow. Winters covered the valley in white. Summers filled the forests with green. And life slowly moved forward like the river beyond the hills. The small cabin near the woods no longer belonged to one lonely hunter. It had become a home. Elias grew older, his beard turning more gray with every passing winter. His back hurt more after long hunting trips, and he moved slower than before, though he rarely admitted it. Vara and Lenny grew too. The frightened little girls he once pulled from the snow were gone. Now they stood tall and strong. Vara became calm and sharp-minded. She spoke little, just like Elias, but she noticed everything around her. People in town had learned not to challenge her easily. Even fully grown men avoided arguments with her after seeing her split logs faster than most workers. Lenny turned out completely different. She laughed loudly, talked too much, and somehow made friends even with people who once feared her. Children in the village slowly stopped avoiding her after she began helping elderly neighbors carry water and repair fences. Still, the sisters never fully belonged in Black Hollow. Some villagers accepted them. Others only tolerated them because Elias stood beside them. And a few still hated them quietly. One cold autumn evening, Elias returned home carrying 2 rabbits from the forest. As he approached the cabin, he heard shouting from behind the barn. Then laughter. Lenny's laughter. He walked around the corner and stopped. Vara stood in the middle of the yard holding a wooden practice sword while 3 village boys circled around her nervously. "You sure this is smart?" one of them asked. "You asked to learn," Vara replied calmly. The tallest boy swallowed hard. "Yeah, but you fight scary." Lenny sat nearby eating an apple while watching proudly. "Hit harder," she shouted. Elias shook his head with a tired smile. Years ago, those same boys would have run away from the sisters in fear. Now they visited the cabin almost every week. Life had changed more than he realized. That night, All four of them ate dinner together while rain tapped softly against the roof. Lenny talked endlessly about the market while Vara repaired a hunting knife beside the fire. For a brief moment, Elias forgot about old wars, old fears, and dangerous bloodlines. Felt like peace. But peace never lasts forever. A few weeks later, strange things began happening around Black Hollow. First, hunters found broken trees deep in the forest. Not cut, snapped. Then livestock started disappearing from farms near the northern hills. Some blamed wolves. Others whispered about raiders. One evening at the tavern, Elias overheard two travelers speaking quietly. "Masked riders," one muttered. "Saw them near the mountain pass." "Bandits." The traveler shook his head slowly. "Moved too organized for bandits." Elias immediately felt uneasy. That same night, he told the girls to stay alert. Vara noticed his expression right away. "You think someone's searching?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. "But trust your instincts." The next few days felt tense. Even the air in town seemed heavy. Then came the fire. It started deep in the night. Lenny woke first because of the smell of smoke. At first she thought something in the fireplace had burned wrong. Then she heard screaming outside. She rushed to the window. Half the village glowed orange beneath the night sky. "Elias!" she shouted. Everyone in the cabin woke instantly. Outside, chaos had already spread through Black Hollow. Flames climbed across rooftops while terrified villagers ran through the streets carrying buckets of water. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered. Then came another sound. Horses. Fast. Vara grabbed her blade immediately. Elias looked outside and froze. Dark riders moved between buildings wearing black armor and cloth masks over their faces. Each carried burning torches. "They're attacking the town," Lenny whispered in shock. "No," Vara said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "They're searching." One rider shouted something across the street. "Find the heirs." Elias felt his stomach tighten instantly. They came for the girls. A loud crash echoed nearby as part of a roof collapsed into flames. People screamed for help. Without hesitation, Elias grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered. But Vara blocked the doorway. "If they want us, hiding changes nothing." Another explosion shook the village. This time closer. Lenny looked terrified but determined. "We can help people." Elias looked at both girls for a long moment. They were no longer children. Finally, he nodded once. "Stay together." The three rushed into the burning village. Smoke filled the air so heavily it became hard to breathe. Villagers ran in every direction while flames spread from house to house. A masked raider charged toward an old man near the well. Before Elias could aim his rifle, Vara moved. She slammed into the attacker with terrifying force, sending both crashing through a wooden fence. The raider hit the ground hard and immediately scrambled backward in shock. Vara stood between him and the villagers. For the first time in years, she stopped hiding what she was. The firelight reflected in her glowing amber eyes. People nearby stared in disbelief. The raider slowly rose again and pulled a curved blade from his belt. Vara tightened her grip on her weapon. Then another attacker rushed toward them from the side. Lenny intercepted him first. She swung a thick wooden pole directly into his chest, knocking him backward into a water barrel. The villagers watched in stunned silence. The same girls many once feared were now protecting them. More fires spread across the market street. Elias spotted a family trapped inside a burning bakery. Without thinking, he ran toward it. "Elias!" Lenny shouted. The roof already crackled dangerously above the doorway, but screams still came from inside. Elias wrapped cloth around his mouth and forced his way through the smoke. Inside, heat blasted against his face. A woman clutched two terrified children near the back wall while flames blocked the windows. "This way!" Elias shouted. He guided them toward the exit carefully while burning wood crashed around them. Just as they reached the doorway, a loud cracking sound echoed above. Elias looked up too late. Part of the ceiling collapsed. He shoved the family outside moments before heavy beams slammed into his shoulder and back. Pain exploded through his body. Outside, Villagers pulled him from the wreckage while smoke filled the air. Lenny dropped beside him immediately. "You're hurt." "I've had worse," Elias muttered through clenched teeth, though his face had turned pale. Nearby, Vara still fought two masked raiders near the town square. But something felt strange. The attackers were skilled. Too skilled. These were not random bandits. One raider suddenly pulled back after spotting Vara clearly in the firelight. Even through the mask, shock spread across his face. He shouted toward the others in a language Elias did not understand. Everything changed after that. The attackers stopped fighting villagers almost immediately. Instead, they focused only on reaching Vara and Lenny. "They know us," Vara realized. More riders entered the square from the northern road. At their center rode a larger figure wearing dark armor covered in fur. Unlike the others, this rider did not hide his face. Scars covered one side of his jaw. His eyes locked directly onto Vara. For several long seconds, neither moved. Then the scarred rider raised one hand. Every attacker instantly stopped. Even the fires seemed quieter suddenly. The rider studied Vara carefully before speaking in the Orc language. Vara answered slowly. Lenny stepped closer beside her. Elias struggled to stand despite the pain shooting through his shoulder. "What's happening?" he asked. Vara looked deeply unsettled. "He asked our family name." The scarred rider dismounted slowly. Villagers backed away in fear as he walked forward through smoke and fire. Then he noticed Elias standing protectively near the girls. The rider's expression hardened instantly. Before anyone could react, he drew a small blade and slammed it into a wooden post nearby. The blade carried a strange symbol carved into the handle. A red fong surrounded by black paint. The moment Vara saw it, all color drained from her face. "Blood Tusk," she whispered. Even Lenny looked shaken. Elias had heard that name only in old stories. The Blood Tusk War Party. One of the deadliest clans ever to cross the northern lands. The scarred rider finally spoke in broken human language. "The daughters belong to the war chief." Fear spread across the villagers immediately. People stepped farther away from the sisters. Some looked terrified. Others looked angry. The rider pointed toward Vara and Lenny. "We searched many years." Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. "You found them," he answered coldly. "Now leave." The scarred rider stared at him strangely, almost with curiosity. Then distant horn sounds echoed from the hills outside town. The rider looked toward the mountains sharply. A second rider approached quickly and whispered something urgently in his ear. The scarred warrior cursed under his breath. He turned back toward Vara one last time. "We return soon," he warned. Then he looked directly at Elias. "Keep them alive." Without another word, the riders mounted their horses and disappeared into the darkness beyond the burning streets. The entire village stood frozen long after they were gone. Only the crackling fires remained. Smoke drifted across the ruined town while injured villagers slowly gathered together in shock. Nobody understood what had just happened. But Elias knew one thing clearly. The past had finally caught up to them. And whatever came next would be far worse than rumors, whispers, or frightened soldiers searching through snowstorms years ago. Because now the Blood Tusk War Party knew exactly where the girls were. The morning after the attack felt colder than any winter Black Hollow had ever seen. Smoke still rose from burned homes across the village. Ash covered the streets like gray snow, and exhausted townspeople worked silently to repair what they could. Some buildings were completely gone. Others barely remained standing. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. Fear had settled over the valley. Every conversation ended with the same question. Why had the Blood Tusk War Party come to Black Hollow? And why were they searching for the two orc sisters living in Elias's cabin? Elias sat outside his home with his injured shoulder wrapped tightly in cloth. Every movement hurt, but he ignored it while sharpening a hunting knife slowly across his knee. Vara stood nearby watching the forest line. Lenny paced back and forth nervously. "They said they would return," she muttered again. "We know," Vara answered quietly. The younger sister stopped walking and looked toward Elias. "We should leave before they come back." Elias finally looked up. And go where? Lenny had no answer. Deep down, they all knew the truth. No matter how far they ran, a war party that large would eventually find them again. By midday, several villagers approached the cabin together. Not friendly villagers. Angry ones. At the front stood a heavy man named Doran, the owner of the grain mill. Elias had known him for years, though never closely. Doran pointed directly toward the sisters. This happened because of them. Lenny lowered her eyes immediately. Vara stepped forward protectively. Elias rose slowly despite the pain in his shoulder. Careful what you say next, he warned calmly. Doran looked nervous for half a second but continued anyway. Our homes burned because monsters brought war to our town. Several villagers behind him nodded. Another man shouted, "They should leave before worse comes." Lenny looked crushed hearing those words. Elias stared at the crowd silently for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Last night those same monsters saved your families." Nobody answered. "You all saw it," Elias continued. "While people ran, those girls stayed and fought to protect this town." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. One older woman finally stepped forward. "He's right," she said quietly. "The younger one pulled my grandson away from a burning cart." Others slowly began speaking too. "They saved people near the market. I saw the older sister stop 2 raiders alone." Doran's anger weakened as more villagers defended the girls. Finally, he spat into the dirt and backed away. "This isn't over," he muttered before leaving. The others slowly followed. Silence returned again. Lenny looked shaken. "They hate us." "Some do," Elias admitted honestly. Vara crossed her arms tightly. "And some always will." That evening, rain clouds gathered heavily above the valley. Elias sat near the fireplace while Vara cleaned weapons beside the table. Lenny quietly repaired torn blankets in the corner. The cabin no longer felt peaceful. It felt like people waiting for a storm. Suddenly, distant horn sounds echoed across the valley. All 3 froze instantly. One horn, then another. Deep, heavy, powerful. Vara rushed to the window first. Her face changed immediately. "They're here." Elias stepped outside. The sight beyond the hills made his stomach drop. Hundreds of riders covered the northern ridge overlooking Black Hollow. Torches burned through the dark rain like endless lines of fire. Massive armored wolves and heavy war horses stood side by side beneath black banners carrying the Bloodtusk symbol. The war party had returned. And this time they had not come quietly. Bells began ringing through Black Hollow as terrified villagers rushed from their homes. Some grabbed weapons. Others simply ran. Children cried while people barricaded doors and windows across town. Elias watched the army slowly descend toward the valley. There were too many. If battle started, Black Hollow would not survive. Vara stepped beside him silently. They came with full clan. Lenny looked pale. "Why now?" Before anyone answered, a single horn blast thundered across the valley again. Then something unexpected happened. The army stopped. Not at the village gates. Not at the houses. They stopped just outside Black Hollow and waited. A large figure slowly rode forward alone. Even from a distance, he looked enormous. Heavy fur armor covered his broad shoulders, and long gray streaks ran through his dark hair. Scars covered both hands gripping the reins. The entire war party remained silent behind him. The giant warrior reached the center of the road and dismounted calmly. Then he spoke in a voice deep enough to carry across the village. "Bring me the human called Elias." Fear spread instantly through the crowd. Villagers looked toward Elias nervously. Lenny grabbed his arm. "Don't go." But Elias gently pulled free. "If I hide now, everyone dies afraid." He walked forward slowly through the silent street. Rain began falling harder around him. The giant orc warrior watched carefully as Elias approached. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Then the warrior surprised everyone. He lowered his head slightly. Not a bow, but close enough. "You sheltered the daughters," the warrior said. Elias frowned. "You burned my town." Pain crossed the warrior's face briefly. "Not my order." Behind him, Several Bloodtusk riders lowered their eyes in shame. The giant warrior looked toward Vara and Lenny standing near the crowd. For the first time, his hard expression softened. "You survived," he whispered. Lenny looked confused. "You know us?" The warrior stepped closer slowly. "I knew your father." The village remained silent as rain poured across the street. Vara's eyes narrowed carefully. "You fought beside him?" The warrior nodded once. "Your father saved my life many winters ago during the Eastern Wars." Elias noticed genuine respect in the warrior's voice. "He was strongest warrior I ever knew," the giant continued, "but also foolish enough to believe humans and orcs could live without endless killing." Vara stared at him closely. "What happened to him?" The warrior's jaw tightened. "Betrayal." Even the Bloodtusk riders behind him looked uncomfortable hearing the word. "Our old chieftain feared your father's influence," the warrior explained. "Many warriors respected him more than their own leader." Lenny stepped forward slowly. "So they murdered him?" The giant warrior lowered his eyes. "Yes." Rain tapped heavily against armor and rooftops around them. Elias finally understood something important. These warriors had not come for revenge. They had come searching for the girls. The giant looked directly at Elias again. "Before your father died," he told the sisters softly, "he gave one final order." Vara barely breathed. "Find my daughters," the warrior said. "Protect them." Silence spread through the street. Even the villagers listened closely now. "We searched for many years," the giant continued. "Most believed you already dead." Lenny looked overwhelmed. "Why didn't you stop the raiders who attacked before?" The warrior's face darkened immediately. "They were not true Bloodtusk." Vara frowned. "What?" "A splinter group," he answered coldly. "Warriors still loyal to the old chief's cruelty. They learned rumors about your location before we did." Elias slowly tightened his grip on the rifle beside him. "So this entire army came here searching for two girls?" The giant warrior looked toward the northern mountains. "No." That single word changed everything. The rain seemed quieter suddenly. The warrior's voice grew heavy. "A greater war is coming." Behind him, the Bloodtusk riders became tense. Vara immediately sensed something serious. "What kind of war?" The giant looked directly at her. "Southern kingdoms." Elias frowned. "The human kingdoms?" The warrior nodded. "They unite armies together for first time in generations." Lenny looked confused. "Why?" "Fear," the warrior answered simply. "They believe all northern clans must be destroyed before another war rises." Murmurs spread through the villagers. Elias stared carefully at the giant warrior. "How large is this army?" The answer came quietly. "Large enough to erase every orc clan in the north." Even Black Hollow's bravest hunters looked nervous hearing that. But the warrior was not finished. "After that," he continued, "they will continue south through frontier towns." Realization slowly spread across Elias's face. Black Hollow sat directly between the northern mountains and the southern trade roads. If war reached the valley, nobody here would survive either. The giant warrior looked toward the sisters again. "The clans are divided. Many chiefs still fight each other instead of preparing." Vara crossed her arms tightly. "And you think we can unite them?" The warrior nodded slowly. "You carry your father's blood." Lenny shook her head in disbelief. "We are not leaders." "Maybe not yet," the warrior replied. "But many warriors still remember your family name." The rain slowly began easing as thunder rolled far away. Elias studied the faces of the Bloodtusk riders behind the giant warrior. They looked tired, worried, not like conquerors preparing to destroy a village. They looked like people standing near the edge of disaster. One younger rider suddenly galloped into the village from the north road. He stopped beside the giant warrior and spoke quickly in the orc language. The giant's expression hardened immediately. "What happened?" Vara asked. The warrior looked toward the mountains again. Scouts spotted southern soldiers crossing the frost pass. Elias felt cold despite the rain. Already, the giant turned back toward the village. "We do not have much time. Fear spread across Black Hollow once more, but this fear felt different now. Not fear of the orcs. Fear of what was coming next. The giant warrior stepped closer to Elias. For a moment, the entire street held its breath. Then the massive orc extended one scarred hand toward the old hunter. "You protected them when nobody else would," he said quietly. "That debt will never be forgotten." Elias looked at the hand for a long second before finally shaking it. Around them, both humans and orcs stared in silence. Because for the first time in many years, they had just witnessed something impossible. Trust. The days after the Bloodtusk War Party arrived changed Black Hollow forever. For the first time in living memory, humans and orcs stood inside the same village without fighting. It still felt strange to everyone. Bloodtusk warriors helped repair burned homes. Villagers shared food around large fires during cold nights. Children who once hid from the sight of orcs slowly began watching them with curiosity instead of fear. But peace remained fragile. Everyone knew danger was getting closer every day. Scouts returned constantly from the northern mountains carrying bad news. More southern soldiers crossed the Frost Pass with each passing sunrise. Entire camps had appeared near the trade roads. The war was no longer a rumor. It was coming. One evening, Elias stood near the edge of the valley watching workers strengthen the wooden barriers around Black Hollow. Beside him stood the giant Bloodtusk leader, whose name Elias had finally learned. Tharn. Even among orcs, Tharn looked massive. But despite his size, he spoke quietly most of the time. "The southern army moves faster than expected," Tharn said while staring toward the distant hills. "How long?" Elias asked. "Maybe 2 weeks." Elias frowned. "That little?" Tharn nodded grimly. Behind them, villagers and warriors worked side by side carrying logs and stone. A few months earlier, such a sight would have seemed impossible. Now it was necessary for survival. Not everyone accepted the alliance easily. Some humans still distrusted the orcs deeply. Some orc warriors hated taking orders near human settlements. Small arguments broke out often. One afternoon, Elias found 2 human hunters shouting angrily at a young Bloodtusk warrior near the market. "You people brought this war here," one hunter snapped. The orc warrior reached for his weapon immediately. Before things turned worse, Vara stepped between them. "Enough!" Her voice cut through the argument instantly. The hunter pointed angrily toward the orcs. "They don't belong here." Vara looked directly into his eyes. "And neither will any of us if we keep fighting each other." The street fell silent. People listened when Vara spoke now. Not because they feared her, because they respected her. That surprised Elias more than anything. The frightened child he once found beneath a broken wagon had become someone others naturally followed. Lenny changed too. While Vara trained warriors and helped organize defenses, Lenny spent most of her time helping injured villagers and frightened children. She somehow made people feel calm even during dangerous times. One night, Elias found her sitting outside the cabin with several village children gathered around her. She was telling stories while roasting potatoes over the fire. The children laughed loudly as she exaggerated every part of the tale. Elias leaned quietly against the doorway watching her. Lenny noticed him and smiled. "What? You talk too much," he replied. She laughed. "You don't talk enough. Someone has to balance things." For a brief moment, Elias forgot war was approaching. Then the horns sounded again. This time not from the north. From the eastern hills. Scouts rode into the village at full speed. "Soldiers!" one shouted. "Thousands!" Panic spread instantly. People rushed through the streets while bells rang across Black Hollow. Elias grabbed his rifle and hurried toward the village square where Tharn and Vara already stood studying the hills. Dark lines of soldiers moved in the distance beneath dozens of banners. The Southern Army had arrived, and they were larger than anyone expected. Rows of armored men stretched across the valley road while mounted riders carried long spears behind them. Heavy wagons rolled slowly through the mud carrying supplies and siege equipment. Lenny stared in disbelief. "That's an army?" Tharn's expression turned grim. "That's only the front line." Fear spread through Black Hollow like fire. Even experienced Bloodtusk warriors looked uneasy now. The enemy camp formed beyond the river by sunset. Hundreds of campfires lit the dark hills. They were preparing for battle. That night, nobody in Black Hollow slept peacefully. Inside the cabin, silence filled the room. Elias cleaned his rifle carefully while Vara sharpened her blade beside the fire. Lenny sat quietly near the window. Finally she spoke. "Do you think we survive this?" Nobody answered immediately. Then Elias finally said, "We survive one day at a time. Same as always." Lenny smiled faintly. "You always say things in the most depressing way possible." That earned a small laugh from Vara. It might have been the last peaceful moment they would share together. Before sunrise, the enemy army moved. War horns thundered across the valley as soldiers marched toward Black Hollow in heavy lines. Villagers rushed to defensive positions while Bloodtusk warriors prepared beside them. Rain poured heavily from dark clouds overhead. Mud covered the roads. The world felt gray and cold. Elias stood near the village gate with several hunters carrying bows and rifles. His injured shoulder still hurt badly, but he ignored it. Nearby, Tharn addressed both humans and orcs together. "Today," he shouted. "They expect us to stand divided." The giant warrior looked across the crowd. "So prove them wrong." The gates opened. Battle erupted across the valley. Arrows darkened the sky while soldiers crashed against wooden barriers near the village entrance. Mud and rain turned the battlefield chaotic almost immediately. Elias fired carefully from behind cover beside other hunters. Near the front line, Bloodtusk warriors pushed enemy soldiers backward with terrifying strength. But there were too many attackers. More enemy troops crossed the river constantly. Vara fought near the center of the village road, protecting gaps in the defenses wherever pressure became strongest. Lenny moved between injured fighters, pulling wounded people away from danger with unbelievable courage. Hours passed. The battle only grew worse. A section of the eastern barrier suddenly collapsed under heavy pressure. Enemy soldiers flooded through the opening. Villagers screamed. Elias saw several children trapped nearby as fighting spread into the streets. Without hesitation, he rushed forward. "Fall back!" someone shouted. But Elias ignored them. He reached the trapped families just as part of a burning wagon overturned nearby. Smoke filled the street while terrified civilians struggled to escape. "Move!" Elias yelled while pulling debris away. A young boy stumbled in panic near the flames. Elias grabbed him and shoved him toward safety. Then pain exploded through his side. An enemy soldier had struck him during the chaos. Elias nearly collapsed but forced himself to stay standing long enough for the families to escape. Nearby, Vara saw him fall. "Elias!" She fought through the crowd toward him with pure panic in her voice. Lenny reached him first. Blood stained Elias's coat heavily now. Tharn and several Bloodtusk warriors pushed the attackers back long enough to drag Elias away from the fighting. Rain poured harder around them. Lenny pressed shaking hands against Elias's wound while tears filled her eyes. "Stay awake," she begged. Elias coughed painfully. "You're both terrible at listening," he muttered weakly. Even injured, he still sounded like himself. Vara knelt beside him silently. For the first time in years, fear completely broke through her calm expression. "You can't die," she whispered. Elias looked at both sisters carefully. The frightened children from the snowstorm were gone. These were strong women now. Strong because they survived. Strong because they cared. And somehow, strong because of him. A faint smile crossed his tired face. "You two did all right," he whispered. Lenny shook her head immediately. "No, don't talk like that." Suddenly, a loud horn echoed across the battlefield. Then another. Enemy soldiers began retreating. At first nobody understood why. Then scouts shouted from the hills. Reinforcements! More northern clans had arrived. Warriors from rival orc tribes charged into the valley beneath different banners. Some Elias recognized from old stories. They had come because of Vara and Lenny, because the daughters of the fallen warrior had called the clans together at last. The southern army began falling back under heavy pressure. By nightfall, the battle was over. Black Hollow still stood. Barely. Fires burned across parts of the valley, while exhausted survivors searched for wounded friends and family. Rain finally stopped sometime near midnight. Lenny sat beside Elias inside the cabin while healers treated his injuries. Vara stood quietly near the doorway watching the dark forest outside. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "You once asked why we trusted you." Elias looked up weakly. Vara's voice softened. "Because you fed us when nobody else would." Lenny wiped tears from her face and laughed quietly. "You gave us one hot meal and accidentally became family forever." Elias shook his head tiredly. "Worst mistake of my life." The sisters laughed for real this time. Outside the cabin, both humans and orcs gathered around shared fires together for the first time. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as survivors. Years later, stories about Black Hollow spread across the frontierlands. People spoke about the terrible winter, the orphan sisters, and the hunter who protected them when the world wanted them gone. Many stories changed over time. Some called Elias a hero. Others called him foolish. But among the northern clans, one story was repeated more than any other. A lonely human once gave 2 starving children a warm meal during a snowstorm. And because of that single act of kindness, a war that could have destroyed thousands was stopped before it truly began. Even long after Elias grew old, Bloodtusk warriors still visited the small cabin near the forest. Above the fireplace hung a new banner carried by united clans across the north. Not a sword, not a crown, just the simple image of a cabin glowing warmly in the snow.